D. Hello, everyone. Today's date is Sunday, January 7, 2024. We're having an Israeli-Palestinian federal government simulation. We are proposing the creation of a common federal government for the people of Israel, Palestine, that would include the area of Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Israel. Over 14 million people. A common government that would be equal to the people of Israel and Palestine, that would be based on separation between religion and government, that would be a democracy with an independent parliament, an independent executive branch with president and vice president, and an independent judicial branch that would include Palestinians and Israelis as equal for the entire area. We have a constitution. You can read the constitution if you go to ipconfederation.org, and our constitution is in 3 languages. So if you go to a constitution, you can read the constitution, how the common government could be created, what will be the relationship between the common government and the current Israeli or the Israeli and Palestinian governments, so that it is clear we are not calling for the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments. We are calling for the creation of a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine based on equality and a constitution with a common parliament, common president, and common judicial branch. So I hope you get a chance to read the constitution on our website. My name is Joseph Avasar. You could reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Also, you can see previous simulations at our website, ipconfederation.org, and you can listen and watch previous recordings with many guests that we had, and many of the questions that you will have or may have will be answered in those previous recordings. Today's simulation is with Professor Omer Bar-Tov. Omer Bar-Tov is a professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Brown University, where he has been teaching since 2000. He is widely recognized as an expert in the field of genocide. He has authored numerous books that explore genocides and crimes against humanity committed by various governments throughout history, including Nazi Germany. In 2023, he published a book titled Israel-Palestine, Lands and People. Additionally, he has written a novel called The Butterfly and the Axe, which was published in 2023. His latest book, Genocide, the Holocaust and Israel-Palestine, First-Person History in Times of Crisis, has recently been released. Professor Bar-Tov was born in Israel and earned his doctorate degree from Oxford University. He served in the Israeli army during the Yom Kippur War, which provided him with firsthand knowledge of the Israeli occupation and apartheid policies towards the Palestinians. We invite many people to participate in our simulations. These are some of the people that have participated in our previous simulations. Many of them have endorsed our simulations. Professor Noam Chomsky participated twice in our simulation and recorded an endorsement of our formula for peace. As far as I know, this is the only endorsement that he ever made for any peace formula in Israel-Palestine. But as you can see, we have many men, women, professors, political scientists, and thinkers in our previous simulations. We invited many other people, as you can see on the screen. Some of them did not respond to us, or some declined to participate. Hopefully, we can bring them in to actually discuss this formula for peace and ask them to stress test our formula for peace, which we think is a good formula for peace. And peace is the only solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Peace is the only vision that would give safety and security to the people of Palestine and Israel. Next, January 21st, we have Hillel Shenker, who is the co-editor of the Palestine-Israel Journal, which is the only joint Israeli-Palestinian publication. We invite people of every political persuasion, regardless of their views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we want to stress test our formula with them. We want to ask them what's wrong, if any, with our formula for peace. And Hillel Shenker is our next speaker. On February 4th, we will have Professor Lior Sternfeld, who is a professor of history at Penn State University. On the same day, we will have Professor Isaac Nevo, who is a professor of the philosophy at Ben-Gurion University. I believe he retired. On February 18, we will have Professor Ofer Ashkenazi, who is at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. On March 3rd, we will have Professor James Gelvin, who is a UCLA scholar of Middle Eastern history. And on March 17, we will have attorney Ahab Masala, who is a civil rights attorney representing Palestinians and Israelis in Palestine and Israel. As you can see, here is his picture with him and his lovely wife. On March 31st, we will have Professor David Mendikoff, who is a professor of Middle Eastern Studies and Public Policy at, I believe he is at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst. Usually we take 120 minutes for the simulation. This is a simulation. This is not a speech. We have several segments in this simulations. Each segment lasts between 5 to 7 minutes, and we take a vote at each simulation. So you will be participating, you will be voting, and you will also have the opportunity to ask questions. And Professor Bar-Tov will be asked to give his opinion after each segment. And then we will end with a session of question and answers for Professor Bar-Tov or for whoever you want to ask questions. And then we'll have closing remarks. We have a video, a short video, it's I believe 2 or 2.5 minutes, that explains what is our formula for peace, and I'd like to play it.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So we will be simulating what we just saw in the video. We will actually ask you to participate and to vote and to take places to be either Israeli or Palestinian parliament members. Before we start the simulation, we usually take a survey, and then we take the survey at the end of the simulation. At this time, I'd like to ask you, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel-Palestine? Please vote at this time. Do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel-Palestine? Please vote.
Joseph, I can't see the voting paper online. Can you ask Dan?
Sure. Yeah, Dan is listening.
Yes.
Okay.
Can Dan send me
I think it has to do
whatever
with
it's called?
I think it has to do mostly with your.
I don't. Oh, really?
No,
oh, I don't think
the same with me. I cannot say anything.
Okay, so I think it has to do with your computer rather than the Zoom, because I see, most people see. So,
well, I see some people that say, one person says, I can't see the voting options, whoever it was.
Joseph, it appeared, the question did appear on the screen, but then it went away. If you can put it back again, it will make it easy for everyone.
Okay, well, we have.
Thank you. Can we just put our hands up otherwise?
Yeah. Can you vote?
There are too many. There are 111 people, 171 people.
Okay.
It's difficult
I
to
see.
answer.
Right now we have 115 people voting yes.
Right, you can add me and
Yes.
cross me off the list. I voted yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So 116 people, 86% voted yes.
You can add me as well, please.
Okay, 117 people, and 14% voted no, which is 19 people.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
It's
All right.
back.
Thank you. We need to go on. All right. That's okay. So the purpose of the simulation, and this is simulation, is to demonstrate to you, the audience, how a common government will work, how it will function, and most importantly, how it will make peace. So it is clear, we are not proposing an Israeli government or a Palestinian government. We are proposing a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine. Professor Bar-Tov is not a representative of the IPC. He is invited to stress test the IPC. I met with him about a week or 10 days ago. I think he understands the formula, but he is not our spokesperson. We are pro-peace. We follow our own narrative. In other words, we do not follow the Israeli narrative or the Palestinian narrative. We believe that if a common federal government will become a reality, it will follow its own narrative, not an Israeli narrative or a Palestinian narrative. We expect to have a rigorous discussion, but let's be very respectful to each other without personal attack. We do not preclude other formulas for peace. In fact, we encourage other formulas for peace, and we also encourage the Israeli and the Palestinian governments to come up with their own formula. Like I said, we are not proposing the dismantling of those governments, so they can continue to negotiate and reach their own agreement. But we believe that a common federal government makes the most sense. We will ask Professor Bar-Tov to judge our plan for peace and to judge us based on these criteria. And we also ask you, all of you, to judge us based on these same criteria. Could the IPC make peace? Is the IPC formula attainable? And we will ask him to judge us not based on perfection. It's not fair to show that it's imperfect. We understand that it's not perfect. But we ask Professor Bar-Tov and all of you, keep that in mind. What is the alternative? What other alternatives are there to what we are proposing? That's the criteria that we are going to hold Professor Bar-Tov and all of you when judging this plan for peace. We can show that the federal government could pass many, many legislations that would be acceptable to both the Palestinians and the Israeli governments, that if it's not acceptable to them, they will lose legitimacy. We're asking you to understand that we can only show you several legislations because we are limited by time. But if you participated in previous simulations, you'll see we have many, many legislation that we can show that both the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will have no choice but to accept. We're asking you to understand that we are only showing you the tip of the iceberg, and we're asking you to look at the big pictures. Do not get into technical arguments about each legislation. We are limited by time, and we do not want to get into technical issues. Most importantly, really, is we're asking you to refrain from comments during the simulation. This is a simulation. It's not a lecture, but we are encouraging you to ask questions. Questions are great, are fine. A simulation is demonstration that mimics the operation of a proposed system. That's what we are trying to show. This is not a lecture. We are trying to mimic the operation of a proposed system, and that's the system that we are proposing. If I show you an airplane and you say, well, how does this plane fly? That's a question. We encourage questions. But if you say airplanes cause pollution or airplanes are unsafe, those are comments. If you want to make the comments, please do so by using the chat or waiting until the end. It's not fair to us during the simulation to need to respond to your comments. And we're asking you to refrain from comments. And I'm going to be strict on that because we usually get people that are continuously making comments during the simulation, but and I'm asking you, please wait until the end for the comments. But again, questions are okay. In order for this simulation to succeed, we need to rely on assumptions. We need to make assumptions. And the assumptions for this simulation are these. These are the assumptions. That we were able to obtain $100 million to spend on a year-long campaign to promote the election. The election in Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem, that we had $100 million to promote it. We want you to assume that we actually held the election and 14 million people, with the exclusion of minors, were allowed to vote. We also want you to assume that 5 million people voted, that 3 million of those people who voted are Palestinians, and 2 million of those who voted are Israelis. We want you to assume that the president received 1.5 million votes out of the entire nationwide election, that the president received 1.5 million votes, and the vice president received 1.3 million. That's what makes the president, because he received more than the vice president. I want you to assume that me, Joseph, was elected president just for the purpose of conducting this simulation. I do not ever intend to run for president. I'm not even qualified under the Constitution, but for the purpose of this simulation, I want you to assume that I was elected president, and I'm going to be acting as president during the simulation. I want you to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts, and I'm going to be asking most of you to participate and take part as parliament members, keeping in mind that you represent your own district. So I'm going to show you a map of Israel-Palestine soon, but right now I would like to ask the audience, before I ask the Professor Bar-Tov, do you have any questions regarding this assumptions? Do you, the audience member, please raise your hand or speak outright and tell me, do you have any? Okay, Pearl, please ask your question.
How are we going to be assigned to districts? Do you assign a district to us during the
No,
simulation?
you choose your own district.
Okay.
We'll
Thank
show
you.
you a map and you choose your district. Any other questions? Arnaud.
Yeah, thanks. Arnaud is my name. Thanks, Joseph. You had on your last slide numbers, first like 14 million people voted, and the breakdown was 3 million Palestinian and 2 million Israelis. I don't understand exactly how you make the breakdown.
That's the assumption, that 3 million people, 3 million Palestinians voted and 2 million, that's an arbitrary assumption.
So the rest abstained or did not go to vote.
The rest, okay, there are 14 million people. Assume that 4 million are not qualified because they are minors. Out of the 10 million, 5 million voted, 3 million Palestinian voted, and 2 million Israelis voted. That's in this assumption. Any other questions? Okay. I don't see any other questions. Let's have Professor Bar-Tov. You're the only one who.
Were there any other candidates who ran for president and vice president?
Yes, there were others, but I was elected by 1.5 million votes, and the vice president was elected by 1.3 million votes. Yes, there were probably over 20 candidates. Yes, good question. Thank you. Okay, let's go to Professor Bar-Tov. You're the only one who is allowed to make comments and ask questions, Professor Bar-Tov, regarding those assumptions.
Yeah, hi. So hi, everyone. Hi, Joseph.
Hello.
The assumptions up to now make sense to me. The one question that somebody was asking, and I think it's a good question, is why are you assuming that more Palestinians voted than Israelis?
That's based on several years that I do these simulations, and I can tell that Palestinians are much more receptive to the idea of a federal government than Israelis. It's an arbitrary observation.
Okay, yeah, well, it's good to know. Yeah, I think we'll have to think about that as we continue, right?
Well, let's think about it now. Do you believe that it is possible, Professor Bar-Tov, if we spend $100 million to promote an election and to have a platform online, meaning on the internet, for people to vote, do you believe that we can reach the numbers that I've shown in the assumptions?
Okay, well, I have to say that I'm a bit skeptical. I think there would be many factors working against you. Now, obviously, if you have $100 million to spend, then you can get a great deal of exposure. But even considering that the situation is not the way it is now, And we have to consider that because we have no idea where things are moving at the moment with all this horrendous war and killing. My sense is that there would be very strong opposition to this attempt, certainly by the
whom?
Israeli government.
By the Israeli government?
Yeah, I would think so. And by most Israeli parties, I think that just in terms of their own sense of survival and the fear that they would be losing power and the suspicion more generally of there being an alternative government, which, as you say, obviously you will say this is not a competition of a government, it would be another one, but in many ways, of course, it would be another political factor that would gain legitimacy by the fact that people vote for it. And so my sense is that certainly on the Israeli side, in the sort of Israeli political world, there would be a lot of suspicion and opposition. On the Palestinian side, frankly, it's a bit hard to say. I mean, obviously, the current political players, whether they're Hamas, whatever happens with Hamas, or the PA, would again see that Hamas would certainly see that as competition and would, I'm sure, would not be in favor. The Palestinian Authority, being as weak as it is, might consider it. But again, I mean, I think that there would be a great deal of opposition. So if you're talking about the sort of political universe in Israel, I think it would be very hard to push this through. Now, you could do it anyway, of course, because you'd have $100 million to sell the idea to the people, regardless of what the parties do. But my suspicion is that if they don't ignore it, if they see it as a real challenge, then they would use all their own propaganda levers, the media in particular, to malign this idea. And they're very good at that. Certainly the Israeli government is. So I think it would be very hard. And then the last thing I would say right now, and we may want to talk a bit more about it, is how would that be seen in the international community? What sort of, would it be sponsored by several governments? Would people see it as a sort of curiosity? After all, it's something that I don't know exists in any other state in the world, this kind of alternative government elected mostly online. I suspect again that most political elites in countries that matter, European countries, the US, would not be enamored of this idea because it basically challenges the whole concept of the state. And political elites, if they are in power, they like it and they don't want to change it. So again, I think it would be hard to gain much support within the political elites. Now, outside of that, yes, I mean, outside of that, I think there are many people in the world today, as we know, in democracies who are very suspicious of their own governments and who find democracy not really to function and not to be representative. This is one reason we see all this populist movement and alternative parties trying to gain a foothold. So in that kind of universe, I think you might be able to find an audience, but that, of course, would only increase the resistance by those who are actually in power, and that would mean also much of the media. And you would be depending, this federation would depend in large part on its ability to filter its own ideas through this maze of existing media. So yes, so I would say my punchline is that without talking about the merits of the idea itself, of course, just is it viable? Will you be able to get this number of votes? I'm somewhat skeptical.
All right, just to when you say they will see it as a competition, they would be correct. It is a competition, but it's a good competition. And if they oppose the idea of a federal government in any way, politically, by way of propaganda or whatever, they will just expose themselves for their inability to give peace to the people of Israel and Palestine. But we'll go on. So at this time, we are going to be asking you, the audience, to ask as parliament members, and we're going to show you a map of Israel-Palestine, and we ask you to choose the district that you represent, the city that you represent. It could be Gaza, it could be Khan Yunis, it could be Ramallah, it could be Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, whatever it is. You choose in your own head what areas you represent, what 47,000 people are in your constituents. And I may ask you during the simulation, what area do you represent? But I'm asking you to be intellectually honest and remain the parliament member throughout this simulation. So we're going to take a vote now. First, we need the Palestinian parliament members to identify themselves, how many Palestinian parliament members we have. So Dan, can you put the vote? Palestinian, just so that we know how many Palestinian parliament members we have. In this simulation, if you identify, you don't need to vote no, because we're just asking you to identify how many of you choose to be, and there is no harm. When you identify what parliament you represent, if you're Palestinian or Israel, it gives you an opportunity to vote in the upcoming legislation that we're going to pass. So I'm going to give it another 15.
Yeah, the wrong question is up.
I think
No,
the wrong question has been posted. The question posted is, do you agree with the legislation? And that's
Right.
not what you are asking.
Yes, it's the wrong question, but still, please identify yourself as Israeli or Palestinian, because we don't have a question for that specific.
How do we identify ourselves? Which is which?
Just say yes if you are Palestinian. Just say yes if you are Palestinian. That's all. Okay. Okay. 15 more seconds. Palestinians. Okay. So we have 72 Palestinian parliament members in this. Okay, and now Israelis. Please vote if you're Israeli.
Joseph,
If you're,
I voted like a Palestinian. Could I vote like an Israeli too?
no, if you're Palestinian, you are Palestinian throughout the simulation.
I have an Israeli citizenship.
Well, this is a simulation. Whatever your real citizenship is meaningless. It's not, this is just in the simulation. Israeli parliament members. How many Israeli? We just need to vote to see how many we have Israeli. Okay, another 25 seconds. See how many Israelis we have. Okay, we have, let's end the vote. We have 44 Israelis. Now, if you want to join later on and you see that it doesn't, that's fine. Okay. So now we have a parliament, we have a president of the whole area. I am the president, you are the parliament members. And now I need someone to act as Israeli prime minister. Do I have a person who is willing to act as Israeli parliament prime minister in this simulation? Israeli prime minister.
If no one else wants it, I'll do it.
Okay. Well, you've done it before. Let's see if someone else is willing to be Israeli prime minister. Do I have a Israeli Prime Minister? Don't worry.
Yes, I'll do it.
Who?
I'll do it. Armand Reich.
Armand Reich. Okay, Armand, you're the Israeli Prime Minister. Okay, now I need a Palestinian leader. Do I have someone who is Palestinian leader?
I can do it, Joseph.
Okay, Mona. Okay. Terrific. So now we have a president, we have a parliament, and we have Israeli and Palestinian leaders, and we can go on. And I just want to respond to what Professor Bar-Tov said. I agree that they will be suspicious, but they don't really have a reason to object to a common government, federal government, because they failed to give peace to the people of Israel and Palestine. The moment they express their opposition, they will have to explain their failure for 75 years. Now, Professor Bar-Tov didn't say that they will not vote, so I'm not going to reply to that objection. But the Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not have a legal authority to object. They can only use propaganda against the common government, but they don't have the legal authority. They are not the authority in Israel-Palestine, and we are not proposing the creation of an alternative government. We are, or a subversive, we're not a subversive organization. We are not calling for the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. So they don't have the legitimacy, they don't have the legal authority, and they never really attempted to disrupt. We tried this before on December 12, 2012, and neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian governments have tried to disrupt. We had a full-page ad in the New York Times, not a simulated ad, but a real ad, and they did not try to disrupt the election. They did not try to disrupt the candidates or and they did not use any propaganda against the against the election. In fact, if they had done that, they would have given the common government a lot of publicity. And I think that they understood that the moment they object to it, they will actually give it more publicity. And they will have to explain their failure. All right. Our first order of business is to pass a constitution, because we have a parliament, and this is the short version of the constitution that I showed you on our website. So let's read out the constitution, and then we'll take a vote, provided no one has, and after we'll answer a question and then we'll take a vote. Libby, could you please read the constitution?
We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislatures and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
All right, so the important part is that we are a common government. Constitutionally, we are precluded from superseding or undermining the Israeli or the Palestinian government. And we are precluded from interrupting or superseding or undermining any agreements between them. They can agree to 2 states, they can agree to 1 state, they can agree to whatever they want constitutionally. We are prohibited from interrupting or undermining the agreements between them. We also constitutionally required to give the Israeli and the Palestinian governments a veto power over any legislation that affects their sovereignty. If it affects their sovereignty, then we have to give them a veto power. We have to give them an opportunity to veto the legislation that affects their sovereignty. So let me go to the audience first and then to Professor Bar-Tov. Does anyone have any questions? Questions, not comments, questions regarding the Constitution? Please raise your hand. If you have any questions. Okay, Arnaud?
Yeah, my question is about the judicial branch. I don't understand if the government keep a judicial branch or this part is superseded by the common government.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So is the judicial branch, the judges, are they now exclusively from the common government? Or do the separate governments still have judicial power?
The judicial branch is made out of Israelis and Palestinians based on equal numbers, and they are chosen by the parliament, Palestinians and Israelis. In order to have the judges, you need 55% of the Israeli and 55% of the Palestinian parliament members agree on the judges. And in order for the judges to make decisions against an Israeli, you need to have a majority Israeli judges. In order to have them decide against the Palestinian, you only need to have majority Palestinian. But both Israelis and Palestinians will be allowed to appeal to their own courts any decisions that is made by the common government. Judith? But you need to unmute, Judith. Yes.
Can you give an example of a significant piece of legislation that could be passed by this new government that would not likely be vetoed by one side or the other, Israeli or Palestinian?
Yes. In fact, that's what we're doing in the simulations day in and day out. If we pass legislation that requires both sides to teach tolerance and understanding to their people, to teach them Hebrew and English, Hebrew and Arabic, I'm sorry, and to exchange of students and exchange of professors, the likelihood that they will veto it is very slim because they would be called anti-peace and they would lose legitimacy. We can pass a common police force, Israelis and Palestinians together, that would replace the Israeli border police. We could pass legislation for an Israeli-Palestinian joint economic zone in Gaza and Israel to create an international airport, international seaport, universities together, all managed by the common government. We can pass legislation for a common passport. We can, I mean, we have, that's what I said at the beginning. We have a whole bunch of legislation that we can show. That's what we are changing every simulation. We are showing many legislation. We can pass, so that's what we are showing. I just, you know, off the top of my head, I gave you some examples. Julian.
Yes. So when somebody was talking about this Constitution, they used the word sovereign, but I don't see it written in the written Constitution. So
correct.
Are you assuming that Palestine has a sovereign government? I don't think they do.
We're not saying they have a sovereign government. We are saying if it violates their sovereignty, we give them a veto power. So you may ask me, what does a sovereignty means?
Right, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, what it means is if they are able to prevent us from implementing the legislation, if we have to ask their permission to implement the legislation, that means that we will be violating their sovereignty, and therefore we give them a veto power. If we can implement their legislation without asking for their permission, or if they cannot block us, then it doesn't violate their sovereignty. Let's go to Amna.
Yeah, I have a question. I think votes should be proportional to the population. So are we saying that, let's say the Palestinian population is a majority and the Israeli population is a minority, do they still have equal power in these two different governments? Thank you.
It doesn't really matter how many Palestinians there are or how many Israelis there are in the parliament. What matters is once you have so many Palestinians and so many Israelis, you'll need 55% of the Palestinians and 55% of the Israelis. So let's assume you have 140 Palestinians and 160 Israelis. You still need 55% of the 160 and 55% of the 140. You will never be able to get equal number of parliament members, Palestinians and Israelis, because the districts are not based on who is Israeli and who is Palestinians. The districts are based on 47,000 each district. A Palestinian could vote for Israeli, and Israeli could vote for a Palestinian. So that means that we will never have an equal number of Israelis and Palestinians in the government, but in the parliament, but we could, once the legislation is up for a vote, we'll need 55% of the Palestinians and 55% of the Israelis. I hope I answered your question. Okay. Babutante Lewis, what's your question?
Okay, thank you. I think my question is very close to that of Amna, because if it's one man, one vote, and some sections are greater in number, definitely they will carry the day. That's why Amna has already.
Yeah. Okay, so it's the same answer.
Mm.
All right, let's go. I think I see another. Who else wants? Oh, Carl. Carl asked a question.
Yeah.
Carl Lawrence.
My question is, given the animosity that exists between the two groups now, what is the chance that Israelis would accept the legitimacy of a government led by a Palestinian president if we assume that more Palestinians voted in your simulation than in fact the president would likely be Palestinian, the vice president would likely be Israeli? What is the chance that the Israelis would accept the Palestinian president to lead this confederation?
Well, Israelis are not a monolithic society. And Israelis, if you count Israelis by numbers, there are 9 million Israelis, including Jews and non-Jews. Many of them will not accept the legitimacy of this government. I agree. But this government would be able to function if it has 5 million people voting for it, or even less. So, that's how democracy works.
So given that there's 9 million Israelis, does that assume in your simulation that there are 5 million Palestinians or 14 million people eligible to vote?
Well, there are actually 7 million Palestinians, because 2 of the 9 million are Palestinians. But we are looking at the whole area, Israel, Palestine, 14 million people, regardless of their nationality. We are saying that if 5 million people are elected, whether or not some will reject the legitimacy in Israel or in Palestine, we are looking at the half glass full, which means that 5 million people voted and they were given legitimacy. They were given political power to function.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right. Okay, let's go to Professor Bar-Tov. Do you have any comments or question, Professor Bar-Tov, regarding this constitution?
Yeah, so the first problem I see is that we're speaking here about an Israeli government and a Palestinian government. Now, there actually isn't a Palestinian government. And for this confederation to work to create some balance, I mean, there needs to be a Palestinian government because if there's only an Israeli government and a non-real Palestinian government, such as what we have in the West Bank, or what we have no idea what will happen in Gaza, then the imbalance that exists between the two populations anyway is much greater. So I don't know how one, first of all, squares this circle. Now, this relates to another issue, which I think is very important to both Palestinians and Israelis. And in this case, when I say Israelis, I'm referring to the 7 million Jewish citizens of the state. But it refers also to the 2 million Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel. What is important to both groups very much is self-determination. And so it's very hard to show that that self-determination is expressed if there is no Palestinian government. Obviously, also, Jews would be worried about their self-determination in a state which has another government that is not about that self-determination, because it is a government that represents, as you say, in equal numbers, both Jews and Palestinians. So it's a different concept, and that would create some tension. So this is one issue that I'm wondering about. The second, you spoke about a secular government, that it would be secular. Now, I'm personally very much in favor of it, and many years ago, that was what the PLO spoke about, a secular democratic state in Palestine. But that's not where much of the population on both sides is. That may be unfortunate, but the very term secular, meaning that the religious authorities, that there would be a separation basically between state and religion, would create the main problem in legitimizing this kind of government in the eyes of many people, both on the Jewish and on the Palestinian side. And the final thing, I'm still not entirely clear, you were asked that, but I wasn't entirely clear about that. If there is a separate judicial branch for the Confederation, what is the relationship between that judicial branch and the judicial branches of the Israeli government and the Palestinian government, if such exists? Does one supersede the other or not? If not, how does it work?
All right, let me answer your question. First of all, you said there is no Palestinian government. There is, I agree with you that the Palestinian government is really not hasn't been elected. I agree with you. However, the common government does not stand on the shoulder of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. It's an independent entity, separate from the Israeli or the Palestinian government. So constitutionally, if there is no Palestinian government, then, or for that matter, if there is no Israeli government, that means that our legislation do not violate the sovereignty. it is not necessary to have a common, to have an Israeli or Palestinian government for this government to function. In fact, if these governments disappear, it makes it easier for this common government to exist. Now, you said about self-determination. A common government does not violate the self-determination or does not impinge on the self-determination of the Israelis or the Palestinians. You are implied in your answer is that the self-determination is only achievable if there is two states. We do not oppose the creation of two states. In fact, the common government could be the best solution to create two states. In fact, we had a simulation on that issue last time, in which we had the people propose two states, and we voted as a common government on two states. And so the common government is, the purpose of the common government is to make peace, and the peace or the common government does not violate self-determination. Now, you said about secular. The secular is not that acceptable in the Middle East. I disagree with you. Let's put it up for a vote. Remember that Palestinians in Israel voted not only for a secular government, but for a Jewish government. So when they were allowed to vote, they voted. Palestinians voted, Israelis voted. Let's put it out for a vote, and we'll see. By the way, we are not calling for the dismantling of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. If they like their religious government, we are not calling for their dismantling. Now, you're asking about the judicial branch. The judicial branch, according to the Constitution, is only exclusively related to laws that are passed by the parliament, by the common parliament. In other words, the judicial branch does not supersede the Israeli or the Palestinian judicial branch. It only has to do with laws that the common government passed, which was acceptable to the Israeli and the Palestinian government. And if the judicial branch violates the rights of the Israelis or the Palestinians, and they feel so, they have the right to, according to the Constitution, if you read the full Constitution, they have the right to appeal to their own judicial system. Ingeborg, do you have questions? You need to unmute. Ingeborg.
Yeah. Okay, now I thank you. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Questions.
I understood the veto is very important. So who would use the veto for Palestinians as long as Palestinians don't have a government, a real government? Because you said before, it's not important whether the Palestinians have an autonomous government. That's my question.
Okay,
because the veto kind of protects.
I am saying it's not important whether they have it or not. The common government could be created and could function, okay? Our purpose is to pass legislation that is acceptable to both sides. And if there is a government that could interfere with the implementation of our legislation, we give them a veto power. It doesn't matter if it's Israeli government or the PA or the Hamas government. If we need to ask their permission to implement the legislation, we give them a veto power. If we don't need to ask their permission, we don't give them a veto power. You'll see that it's coming up. All right, let's take a vote. Palestinian parliament members. Now you must vote yes, because you are a Palestinian parliament member and you are part of the parliament, and you have to pledge allegiance to the Constitution. So let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. If you vote no, you are excluded from the parliament because you have to swear allegiance to the government, just like any other government in the world, democratic government. All right. Okay, 5 more seconds to vote. Some Palestinians have not voted, so in real life, you will be required to vote, to pledge allegiance to the Constitution. Otherwise, you are excluded from the parliament. No democratic parliament in the world allows its parliament members to be part of the parliament if they do not accept the Constitution. So if you do not accept the Constitution, you cannot be a parliament member. All right, 98% of those voted yes. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members. Again, those who voted no are excluded from the parliament. You cannot vote on legislation, on upcoming legislation. All right, publish the vote. 94% voted yes. All right, so we have a constitution, we have a parliament. Let's go to the first order of business. By the way, up to now, the Israeli or the Palestinian leaders have not been given a veto power. We function independently of them. All right, let's go to the to the next legislation granting a veto power to the separate governments. Charles, could you please read out the legislation? Charles?
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in these governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
So basically, this legislation says, if these governments are indispensable, we will give them a veto power. If they are not indispensable, we will work on our own. We are really the only legitimate government in Israel-Palestine. The Israeli government has not been elected by the people in Israel-Palestine. The Palestinian government have not been elected by the people of Israel-Palestine. We are the only one, and therefore we will give a veto power to those governments that are indispensable. If they are not indispensable to us, if they are not indispensable, we will not give them a veto power. Does anyone, let's go to the audience. The people in the audience, do you have questions regarding this legislation? The audience. Questions? Pearl. Pearl, please ask your question and unmute.
How do you decide which issues are indispensable for each of these governments? It seems like you could come to gridlock pretty quickly on both sides in what they consider indispensable and therefore will veto.
We decide what's indispensable. If we pass legislation and we realize that we cannot implement the legislation without the consent of that government, then we give that government a veto power. We are the one who make that decision. based on our need and based on our ability to implement the legislation. Let's go to Aaron. Oh, I'm sorry. Any other questions?
He asked my question, so that's why I didn't put my hand up again.
Okay.
I have a
Arnaud,
question.
do you have a question?
Okay. Yes, I wonder if the fact that we oh, sorry, I have a lot of echo if someone can. So does it contradict like point 5 or 6 of the Constitution where it's written already there
I
is
hear an
veto
echo.
power?
I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Arnaud, please ask your question.
Thank you. So I see in this legislation that it's not indispensable that it's given veto power to the Israeli government and to the Palestinian government, right? That this could be.
They don't have a veto power on our legislation for veto power. You're correct.
But in the Constitution, like I think point 6, it's we voluntarily give legislature and the government of Israel and Palestine veto power over the legislation. So if now it's repealed here, does it seems it may contradict the Constitution.
It says we voluntarily give the legislator and the government of Israel and veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. So we can pass a we can pass the veto power legislation explains how we decide what's in the domain and control of the existing governments. Let's go to Pearl. You need to unmute. Pearl.
Can you give us an example of,
yes,
of indispensable versus dispensable? Because I'm still a little confused.
Yeah, okay. So if we pass a legislation regarding our budget, the Israeli government, we don't need to give the Israeli government or the Palestinian government a veto power over our budget. If we decide to create a office to negotiate with a foreign office, to negotiate with Iran, with Hezbollah, and with Israel, or with Hamas, to negotiate for peace and to try to create peace, we can do it even though the Israeli or the Palestinian governments opposed to that. We can do it on our own. We don't need their permission. We can do it regardless of whether or not they authorize it or not. There are other legislations that we have. I just can't come up with the top of my head, but that's what we do in the simulation. Go to Peter.
Does this mean that any legislation that requires money to be spent by either or both of those governments is indispensable, meaning that it can be vetoed?
If we want to build a joint economic zone between Israel and Gaza, then both of them will have a veto power, because even if we have billions of dollars, we cannot build a joint economic zone between Israel and Gaza without them giving us permission to do it. Let's go to Carl, or.
Yeah, I still don't understand what is considered issues that are dispensable versus indispensable. You just said that it would be indispensable and they would not have veto power over our budget. But then you said, but they would have veto power over how much money they needed to spend on, certain issues. I guess I'm still not clear on what's considered indispensable and what's considered dispensable. Are you saying that what's dispensable is things that only concern the parliament or government of Israel, the subsection of Israel, but anything that concerns the entirety is then indispensable?
Whether it is dispensable or indispensable is related specifically to the legislation we pass, okay? We are an independent entity. We would like to pass legislation, or we intend to pass legislation for the people of Israel-Palestine. There are several entities that are standing in our way. One of them is the Israeli government or the Palestinian government. If they are standing in our way and we cannot implement those legislation without getting their permission, then we give them a veto power. But if we can implement that legislation, then they are dispensable. And we can pass the legislation, we can implement the legislation without their permission. We don't need permission from the Israeli or the Palestinian government to negotiate peace. We can do it even if they agree or don't agree. They cannot stop us from doing it. But if we want to build an airport, if we want to replace their police force, then they are indispensable. And therefore, we have to give them a veto power. But you'll see it. It's legislation by legislation. All right. Professor Bar-Tov, do you have any comments or questions regarding this legislation?
I think I'm sort of wrapping my head around this, but I'm thinking along the following lines. I mean, the most important thing for people in Israel-Palestine, or the two most important things, are land and rights.
Sorry, land and what?
And rights.
Rights?
Rights, yes. Do you have equal rights, democratic rights, national rights? It's
I see.
rights of return, all of those things. Rights are, so these are the two, I would say, the two most important issues. So if, say, you are speaking about the Confederation could negotiate peace, whether that it's agreed upon by the two states or not, well, peace is about rights and land. That's why peace is not being reached, because people want rights and they want land, and they can't decide on who has rights and who has the rights to give rights, who can give those rights, and who has land and where that land is. So, I mean, it just seems to me that on the cardinal issues, after all, what you're trying to do is to create a confederation that will bring peace. That's the real goal here.
Correct.
But for that peace to happen, there needs to be a mechanism that enables discussions over land and rights. Without that, it would just be talk. It would not be action. And maybe you can come up with some example. I can't think of an example of speaking about peace without deciding on land, who can live where, and what rights do they have where they live. And so this notion of a veto here, there would have to be an agreement by both of these states on that before the Confederation can do anything about it, I think. And if it tries to do something that one of the sides does not agree about, and that's usually what they don't agree on, then they would veto it. So that's my difficulty here. It's not whether it's dispensable or indispensable. It's whether it touches on the cardinal issues or on marginal issues.
Well, basically, you were saying you got to stick with the narrative that the Israeli and the Palestinian governments have given us for 75 years. We are saying, no, we have a different narrative. We choose our own narrative. And the narrative is the entire people of Israel, Palestine. It doesn't have to conform to the Israeli or the Palestinian formula, which, by the way, have been a model of failure. We are saying we can come up with different narrative. In other words, we don't have to put the land as supreme. We can put people as supreme. We don't have to give the Israeli government to be the total control or the Palestinian government. In other words, we are talking about a completely different way to make peace and not be restricted by the Israeli or the Palestinian. And we can show, and many legislation that demonstrate how we are having a different narrative that would make it easier to make peace. All right, let's have, Una, did you have a question? You need to unmute.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to ask a question to Professor Bar-Tov. Professor Bar-Tov, when you say the land, well, we all know whose land it belongs to, number one.
Una,
yeah.
the question is regarding this legislation. We're not going to have the discussion yet.
Okay, all right then. But I wanted to say thank you, Joe, for
questions regarding the legislation. We need to focus here.
Okay.
All right. Let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Palestinian parliament members, do you support the idea of giving a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government on questions in which they are indispensable? Palestinian parliament members.
I can't see the voting paper.
Okay, you're
Joseph.
voting yes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, publish the vote. Okay, 35 voted yes, 94%. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote. Israeli parliament members, please vote. Do we have the vote for the Israeli parliament members? I don't see it too, but hopefully it's up there. Dan, is it up there?
Yes.
Okay. 10 more seconds for Israeli. Please publish the vote for Israeli parliament members. Okay. 86% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. So now we agree who to give veto power to, under what circumstances. And let's go to the first legislation. And that legislation, it will be given a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian parliament government. Libby, would you be so kind to read out this legislation?
Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians. Prioritizing teaching Arabic and Hebrew in public schools to achieve proficiency of both languages by Israeli and Palestinian students. Create a mutual task force to ensure the teaching of both languages. Educators to draft textbooks educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. IPC as the facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, and Hamas. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
All right, does anyone have any questions from the audience regarding this legislation? Amna, please, Amna Alian, please ask your question.
I agree with most of it, but I think we're going to have a problem with the teaching of history. I think it should just focus on teaching tolerance.
And what is
that's-
your question regarding teaching history? What is your question?
Because we're going to differ, both sides are going to differ. It's going to create a problem. We need something that brings us together, not divides us. Let people teach the history that they want, but let us together teach tolerance for both sides.
Okay, so your question is, how do you teach history when both sides see different history? That's your
Correct,
question.
correct.
Okay. And the answer is you teach both histories. You can teach the Israelis and the Palestinians the point of view of each side. You don't have to merge it, and you don't have to say what is the truth. You can teach the Israelis what the Palestinians believe, and you can teach the Palestinians what the Israelis believe. Any other questions?
Okay, yeah.
Yes, Joseph. Oh, sorry.
Olivia, ask your question.
Yes, I will do. And why don't you take it one step further and have the school children in the same establishment, in the same building, and within that building they separate when each one studies its history or its language plus the language of the other. Just let me say why. In Northern Ireland, the children are still going to separate schools.
Olivia,
Okay,
that's your
okay,
question.
okay.
Why are you not?
That's my
taking it
question.
one step
That's my
further?
question. Yes,
Okay,
Joseph.
because I anticipate that we will not be getting 55% of the Israeli or the Palestinian parliament members to that option. We need to take it one step at a time.
You're correct. Like the hand-in-hand schools, I think are good
Any
in
other
Jerusalem.
Okay, hearing no questions. Professor Bar-Tov, do you have any comments or questions regarding this legislation?
There are other hands up, Joseph.
Oh,
Mona
okay,
has-
so I'm sorry. Some reason I don't see it, even though, oh, here. Okay, 4 people raised their hand, but I sorry, I don't see it.
Julian has a question.
Okay, ask the question, please, Julio.
Julian, yeah.
Julian, I'm sorry.
So do you think there's any possibility that the Israeli government would allow the teaching of the Palestinian narrative and their perspective on the colonization, as they see it, in their schools?
Well, we are giving them a veto power, and we have a prime minister of Israel. He's going to have a veto power. We'll see if he vetoes it. Any other questions?
Yes, Joseph.
Yes.
We just voted, excuse me, to give the Palestinian state and the Israeli state a veto, but this legislation seems to also give Hamas a veto. Is that an outdated reference, or is that the intention of this legislation?
Well, it's the intention of the legislation, but you're asking me why is it that we don't have a Hamas government represented?
No. As Palestinian president, I'd rather not divide the sovereignty of the Palestinian state, which should be one state governed by one sovereign authority. So I would object as Palestinian president to the extent that I can that Hamas is being given a veto power, when the Constitution and the vote just taken by the membership of the IPC conferred a veto on the state of Palestine and the state of Israel, not on Hamas.
Yeah, okay, but it's not within your jurisdiction to object as to who we give a veto power to. You are given a veto power as the parliament, as the president of the Palestinian people. If we have to implement our legislation within an area that we believe is the Hamas can block us, we will decide to give them a veto power if we so choose. It's not for you to tell us who to give a veto power to. We're an independent, separate government.
I'm not objecting, I'm asking, because this seems to go beyond what you just voted on, but I accept your explanation.
Yeah, okay. Let's have any other questions? All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Professor Bar-Tov, do you have any questions or comments regarding this legislation?
Well, I think the main questions were asked. My suspicion is that neither the Palestinians and the Israeli state would use their veto power not to teach the other narrative. They are not doing it now, and it's unlikely that they would, but that's, as you say, that's the veto power. I do understand the question about Hamas, and I think that in some future version of this legislation, it should be taken up because it is yet another competing authority. And I don't know that we can talk about it now, but if there is a Palestinian state and that Palestinian state claims to be the representative of Palestinians, then there cannot be another authority. And if there is, then the Confederation could be open to all kind of other claimants to authority in that area, and that would complicate matters a great deal and would undermine the Confederation, I think. But that's something to think about probably in the future, not specifically about this legislation. Teaching tolerance and understanding, I'm totally in favor of that. Yeah.
Okay, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote. Palestinian parliament members. Okay, publish the votes. 100% of the Palestinian parliament members who voted yes. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Okay, publish the votes. 96% of the Israeli parliament members. So this now let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation? Israeli Prime Minister. Armand.
Yes, no, I will not veto this legislation.
Okay, let's go to the Palestinian president. Are you going to veto this legislation?
I fully endorse this legislation.
All right, thank you. Terrific. So let's go to the next legislation, and that is jurisdiction solution. Charles, could you please read it out? And while Charles is reading it out, I'm going to take a short break. I read it, so and I'll be right back.
Okay, jurisdiction solution. The two-state solution has been attempted multiple times, but it has resulted in significant violence and less peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It has also failed to achieve its intended goal. The IPC does not oppose the two-state solution or any agreements between the Israeli and Palestinian governments. It recognizes their need for self-determination. The IPC, which is elected through general elections and allows all Israelis and Palestinians from the river to the sea to vote, is the only legitimate government in Israel-Palestine. We acknowledge the Israeli government's right to pass and enforce laws that affect individuals and land under its control. We also acknowledge the Palestinian government's right to pass and enforce laws that affect individuals and land under its control. If the IPC laws contradict the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws, preference is given to the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws. If the Israeli and Palestinian laws contradict each other, the IPC will pass its own laws in accordance with its constitution.
And by the way, this is one of all these legislation that we're showing today were actually after a discussion with Professor Bar-Tov. Does anyone have any questions in the audience regarding this legislation?
Could I
Question.
just say that Baba Tunde Lewis has had a hand up many, many, many times and has never been called on, and the hand is
Okay.
still up.
You
so
know, if
perhaps-
you see, then you can call on them. Okay, please ask the question.
He needs to unmute. Babatunde, if you have a question, you need to unmute.
I've raised up my hand during the time we are talking about the former district we passed through, because what is my concern about what we are doing today is the situation of Palestinians. Because if Palestinians are divided into two,
Do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Okay, does anyone have any questions regarding the legislation, please? I see two participants raise their hand, but I don't see their names.
Carolyn
So
Harris and Amna Alian.
please ask the question. 4 participants.
Yeah, I just want clarity on who controls what part of the land. Is it based on the 1967 borders? Is that what we're talking about when we're talking about who controls what part of the land or who has control over some land? Thank you.
Okay, we are not speaking about control of the land. We are the government of the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. We are the only legitimate government in the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. As far as we are concerned, it would be best to give us total control of the land. However, there is the Israeli government and the Palestinian government. And we are passing legislation to manage the lives of Palestinians and Israelis, given the fact that there are two entities that we have to pay attention to. So we are not really about who is in control. We are about what rights the people of Israel and Palestine have and how to enforce those rights. Any other questions?
Question. I have a question.
Yeah, Julian.
So, yeah, could you explain to me this first sentence here? The two-state solution has been attempted multiple times. My understanding of the history is there's never been two states, independent sovereign states, at all in the whole history of Palestine. It's either been ruled by Britain or France or the current state of Israel.
So what is your question?
Explain this statement to me. It doesn't make any sense. Has been attempted multiple times.
Correct. There were many, many negotiations by Israeli and Palestinian and American and European officials to create two states. That means that it's been attempted multiple times.
The creation of two states. Okay, I understand now.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, I'm Carolyn Harris.
Yeah, hi, Carolyn.
I'm referring to the last 2 bullet points. I feel those last 2 points are absolutely contradictory. You cannot have both of them in one document.
If the IPC laws contradict the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws, preference is given to the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws. Okay?
Well, if you give preference to
we give
any
preference.
one of them, you cannot, if you then say the last one, if the IPC passes its own laws, which one of these two is implemented? They're contradictory.
Depending on the laws. If the laws contradict, if the IPC laws contradict the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws, preference is given to the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws, okay? If the Israeli and Palestinian laws contradict each other, okay? So if the Israeli law says Jerusalem is our capital, and the Palestinians say Jerusalem is our capital, that means that they are contradicting each other. Then the IPC will pass its own laws in accordance with the Constitution. We will pass our own laws. We will have 55% of the Israeli parliament members and 55% of the Palestinian parliament members voting, and then we will submit it to the Israeli and the Palestinian government to veto. If they don't veto, that would be the law of the land.
I do not see how this will work, but go ahead.
Okay, all right.
That's my.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
I have a question.
Basically, we are creating a system to pass legislation that neither side will be able to veto. That's what it's about.
Okay.
All right.
I have a question.
Yes, Peter.
This is a more general thing, but it comes up here because you say it's the only legitimate government of Israel-Palestine.
Correct.
Are you creating a sort of hypothetical entity, political entity that's called Israel-Palestine as if it was a one state?
This is a simulation of a hypothetical government, true, of the whole area of Israel-Palestine. Yes, with the creation of a separate, or with separate Israeli and Palestinian governments. So if we lived in 1946 or 47, and you've asked me what is the solution, I would have said, well, the solution is not to create a Israeli Jewish government or a Palestinian government, the solution is to create a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine to give peace to the people of Israel and Palestine. However, we are in 2024. There already are governments, Israeli and Palestinian governments. So what do? We cannot dismantle those governments. So let's create a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine. And the way to deal with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments is to give them a veto power over legislation which affects their sovereignty. All right, let's take a vote. Oh, I'm sorry, Professor Bar-Tov, do you have any comments or questions regarding this jurisdiction solution?
So my comment really, if you look at bullet point number 4, this sort of came up in one of the questions. We acknowledge the Israeli government's right to pass and enforce laws that affect individuals and land under its control.
Right.
Now, Israel now controls much of Gaza and much of the West Bank. Do we consider that land under its control? Under whose control are the occupied territories?
We acknowledge simply what it says. Yes. If they have control, we acknowledge their control.
But it's illegal control. So, I mean,
we didn't say it's legal. We say we acknowledge. We don't, they are in control. We acknowledge it. Look, if you walk down the street, okay, and there is a person with a gun aiming at you, you acknowledge his control. You do not acknowledge his legitimacy. You don't acknowledge his legality. You acknowledge his control.
Correct, but if you go to the next point, which is about the Palestinian government and enforce laws that affect individuals and land under its control, then it doesn't have any control. So you're basically acknowledging the situation as it is now. The control over the entire land is by the Israeli Authority, but there is an implicit fiction that there is a Palestinian government and that government has control, but in fact there is no government and there is no control. And so
let's assume that you're correct. Let's assume
Yeah.
that you're correct. I'm not gonna, so what?
Well, it means that thereby you are basically creating an entity that would be next to an Israeli state that controls the whole land. And there is no mechanism in this that actually provides any change in that situation, since that entity would have veto power over everything that it cares about, which is control of that land. And so it either makes this irrelevant, or it in fact makes possible the Israeli claim that as if it is not the controller of the whole territory, although it actually is. So it can play into a particular Israeli fiction, which has made it possible to remain in this kind of control for all these years, for 56 years.
Even if they have
difficulty.
control is not what gives them the right.
I know it doesn't, but you're giving them a kind of implicit right by saying, yes, this is the area that they control and they have veto power over it.
No, that's not true. We say, if the IPC, look, if we eliminated this altogether, it wouldn't make any difference. Okay, so I can, hold on, I can end the show right now, go to this legislation. I'm sorry, I can stop sharing and sorry, share again. And even if we even if we eliminate that point, or the next point, it wouldn't make any difference. In other words, here we go. We can have this legislation and eliminate these 2 points. The point is not whether they have control or whether we recognize their control. Like I said, we are, for purposes of clarification, we say, yes, they have control, but that doesn't mean that we acknowledge their legitimacy. The point is whether they have the right to pass laws. How do we deal with the laws? And it says, if the IPC laws contradict the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws, preference is given to the respective Israeli or Palestinian laws. If they contradict our laws, then we give preference to the Israeli or the Palestinian laws. However, if their laws contradict each other, we will pass our own laws in accordance with the Constitution. So everything above that could be eliminated.
I have a question.
Yes, Armand.
What would give the IPC the legitimacy to act on the laws that it would pass? I don't understand how you can just assume that power and, I mean, can pass legislation all at once, but would it have the power to implement those laws?
We will have the power to, just like any democracy. What gives a democracy the power to implement, to pass legislation and to implement? What gives the
legitimacy of the government?
the legitimacy of the government given to it by the people. And that's what we are asking for. We are assuming that 5 million people have given us legitimacy.
Okay, so, but at the same time, you acknowledge the existence of my Israeli government and the Palestinian government, but you're also asking for them to acknowledge the power of the IPC. Is that
We're
correct?
not asking them, we are not asking them to acknowledge the power of the IPC. The IPC is once the election takes place, it's a fact, it's reality. Okay? We are giving them a veto power because we understand that we cannot implement the legislation without them giving us the authority to do so.
Okay. Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's go to a vote. Palestinian.
Ingeborg has her hand up.
Okay, please ask your question. I see 2 hands. Please ask your question because I don't see the names, so it's not clear to me.
You're muted, Ingeborg.
Ingeborg, you're
Okay,
muted.
please ask the question.
Yes, the veto is was important to me before already. Like, does Israel have a veto power if we have new laws in the occupied territories? It concerns like the same 2 points Professor, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, criticized before. Like, because Israel will always veto anything that reduces its control over these territories.
Well, what's your question?
Yes, does Israel have a veto concerning our IPC's decisions over the occupied territories?
We already passed legislation on what gives the existing government, how do we give them a veto power? If they are indispensable, we give them a veto power. If they are dispensable, we do not give them a veto power. In other words, if we need them to allow us to implement the legislation, we give them a veto power. If we don't need them, we don't give them a veto power, regardless of what territory we're talking about or regardless of what laws we're talking about. If they are if they can prevent us, yes, they have a veto power, regardless of what government we are talking about. Any other questions?
So, like, if we say we don't want the checkpoints anymore, they will always veto it. So
okay, so if they veto it, if we have, it depends on the legislation. If we pass legislation that the Israeli government, if it vetoes it, it's going to lose legitimacy internationally or nationally, then they will have a hard time vetoing it. I am the president. I am going to embarrass them, and I'm going to put international pressure on them not to veto it.
that's good. I can accept that. Okay, thank you for the explanation.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Amna.
Okay, please, Amna, please ask the question.
Okay, I just want to be sure we're voting on this legislation after it has been revised, after you have removed the 2 statements about land control, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote.
Youssef?
Yes. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Okay, publish the vote.
Ingeborg, could you please mute yourself?
93% of the Palestinian parliament members voted.
Where can I mute myself? I'm sorry, I don't see it.
On the side where you have the microphone, just click on that. 96%, 93% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please vote, Israeli parliament members. Publish the vote. 86% voted in favor of this. So we don't have to speak about two-state, we can speak about jurisdiction. And by the way, jurisdictions is the methods to resolve questions that includes territories. It's been done in every state of the United States, in the federal government. It's not a novel idea. It's done in Europe, it's done in the United States, and in states and in cities and counties all the time. All right, let's go to our next legislation. Libby, would you be so kind as to to read out the legislation?
Are you not going to ask
Yosef,
evidence for
Yosef.
the veto?
Yes, you can.
The IPC,
Can I ask?
Yes, go ahead, Ehab.
I'll ask in Hebrew and you will translate to English.
Please, okay.
במפה שצירפת מופיעה רמת הגולן כחלק מהמפה הישראלית-פלסטינית. למה?
Okay, so the question, Ehab, by the way, Ehab is going to be he's an attorney he's asking, why are we including the Golan Heights in Israel-Palestine? And the answer is that there are Israelis and that are citizens of Israel, and there are Palestinians and Syrians who live there. And in order for the government, the common government, to have legitimacy, we want the Palestinians and Israelis who live in the Golan Heights to be participating in the election and to have parliament members. Let's go to this legislation.
all right. Rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. The IPC is the only government in Israel and Palestine that was legitimately elected by the entire population. The IPC elected 300 parliament members in Israel and Palestine, with approximately 125 of them being elected by the people of Gaza and the Southern Israel area near the Gaza-Israel border. Over 5 million people in Gaza and Israel are directly and personally affected by the violence that has occurred since the events of October 7th and beyond. Thousands of homes, roads, and infrastructure buildings, including hospitals, have been destroyed. Law and order and civil society have been destroyed in Gaza and Southern Israel. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore normal, peaceful existence to the area in Gaza and Southern Israel in the foreseeable future. The future of the people of Gaza and Israel is interconnected. The IPC Parliament is obligated to the well-being of all the people of Israel and Gaza, including those constituents who were displaced from their homes in Gaza and Israel. The IPC is committed to rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel and ensuring the immediate return of all the people in Gaza and Southern Israel to their homes.
Go on to the next page.
Okay. The IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. The IPC is calling for the immediate return of all political hostages and prisoners to their respective jurisdictions. The IPC is calling for the rebuilding of Gaza and Southern Israel by requesting a $50 billion grant from the world community, including the Israeli and Palestinian governments, to aid in the rebuilding of the areas in Gaza and Southern Israel affected by the devastation. The IPC will remain the legitimate government in Israel and Palestine with jurisdiction in Gaza, while providing veto power to the Israeli and Palestinian governments on matters that affect their sovereignty. the Israeli and Palestinian governments are bestowed a veto power over this legislation.
Okay, so we give a veto power to the Israeli and the Palestinian government over this legislation. Audience, do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Audience.
So I question, I understand why you're saying an immediate ceasefire, but I question how you could possibly think Israel would agree to this as long as Hamas has a veto power.
Okay, that's a comment, not a question. Do you have any, we'll take a vote. Does anyone have any questions?
This doesn't seem to get.
Okay, I see two participants
Yes,
raise
I
their
have a
hand.
question, please.
Yes, yes.
The
Please.
sentence, like the IPC is calling for the immediate return of all political hostages and prisoners. Does it mean all the Palestinian prisoners who are not, I mean, there are thousands and thousands. Are they included in this
Yes.
paragraph?
Yes, it says all.
All, okay. That will be difficult, but would be great.
Okay, any
Yeah,
other
thanks.
question?
I have a question, Joseph.
Yes.
My reading of this legislation is that only the Palestinian state and the Israeli state have veto, not Hamas. Is that correct?
We did not specify at this time, but the reading of this is correct. But in reality, we would give Hamas a veto power as well because they are holding the prisoners. Any other question?
Amna has her hand up.
Okay, I'm not, please ask the question.
So if the
I have a
Israelis,
question.
if the Israelis veto this, how do we resolve this then? How do we go forward?
Well, if they veto this, we will apply pressure on them because we are the legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. It is our wish to have peace and to rebuild the area. We are asking for money internationally, and we will put pressure on them because we are a political entity that is more legitimate than the Israeli or the Palestinian government and has more votes than the Israeli or the Palestinian. Yes, so we will put pressure on them to accept this legislation. We have a carrot and a stick. Any other question? Please
Yes,
ask.
I have a question.
Yeah, Armand.
So, returning of all political hostages and prisoners, political prisoners, does that include people convicted of terrorist activities?
Yes. Any other questions?
Carl has his hand up.
Okay, go ahead and ask.
Yeah, following up with that question, if those
Carl.
people are convicted of terrorist activities, which might include murder, are you saying those people are to be freed or those people are to be returned to the custody of their respective governments?
This legislation is for them to return.
Return as free people, even if they've been convicted of murder?
Correct.
Sorry, Joseph, that's not what it says. Return to their respective jurisdiction. They can serve their sentences under the sovereignty of their respective jurisdiction.
That was my
It
question.
doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. If you want to change that legislation, look, I'm not the king here, okay? If you think that it would be better to change the legislation, yes, by all means.
But it doesn't say returned as free people either. So I mean, it's not saying that either. You're reading that into it.
It's vague on that issue.
Mhm.
Okay.
So it can be,
Look,
can we interpret it for the sake of this legislation? That those who are serving legitimate sentences after due process and trial will continue to serve their sentences under the respective jurisdiction, whereas those that have not been charged with any crime and have not been convicted of any crime can be returned as free persons to their respective jurisdiction.
I agree.
All right,
Yes,
so,
as
yeah, okay,
Israeli
so let
Prime
me,
Minister, that is acceptable.
okay, then.
I don't think it requires an amendment. It's just an understanding of the existing words, if I may.
Okay,
I think it needs to be rewritten, honestly.
Yeah.
As Israeli Prime Minister, I would veto that in a minute. It would be DOA.
the IPC is
Without it
calling for the
actually
immediate
being
return
spelled
of all
out that way.
political hostages and prisoners to their respective jurisdictions. And for those convicted to serve their remaining sentence. How do you spell sentence? S-E-N.
SENTENCE.
At the jurisdiction for which they have been released. Okay?
I have a questions about respective jurisdiction.
We're
Who is
past 11
Who is
o'clock
the
here.
respective jurisdiction in the occupied territories? Because right now it is the Israeli military law. So what does it mean, return to the respective jurisdiction?
It means to whoever is holding the Israeli prisoners has jurisdiction. Whoever is holding the Palestinian prisoners has jurisdiction, and there will be an exchange between those two.
Joseph,
Yes.
we're just past 11.
Okay.
In order for time for Omer
Okay.
Bar-Tov.
All right, so let's take a vote on this. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Okay. And let's go to publish the vote. 97% of the Palestinian parliament members voted. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members, please vote. Publish the vote. 69% of the Israeli parliament members voted yes. Let's go to the now the Prime Minister of Israel. Are you going to veto this legislation? Mr. Prime Minister.
You're muted, Armand.
As written, this is perfectly acceptable.
Okay, good. And the Palestinian Parliament, Palestinian President.
Could I make a reservation before I state my position briefly?
Okay.
Okay, I mean, the Palestinian Authority will accept any support from any national, regional, or international entity that is willing to restore civilian sanctity on both sides of the border and Gazans to their homes and where they belong. However, the continuous reference to the illegitimacy of both states when they are the recognized states in the international community in the United Nations, respectively.
Mona, please tell us if you're going to veto this legislation.
I'm telling you that I will not veto it, but there is a reservation that the legitimacy of the two states, which is recognized by the world, even if the particular leaderships of the two states is not particularly popular, should be respected as a matter of principle, and that is the reality in the world.
Yeah, you're trying to tie in. You're trying to tie in the issues of your government. Okay.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that the first bullet says that the IPC is the only legitimate government. I'm responding to that and making a reservation to that bullet. I will,
Okay.
however, support the legislation in the interest of the civilians, of the Israelis and the Palestinians, and in the interest of the Gazan people restoring peace and security and the right to their homes in their homeland.
All right, let's take a post-simulation survey. After participating in the simulation, do you support a common federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? So after you participated in the simulation, please vote. This is for all Israelis and Palestinian parliament members. Do you support a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine?
Actually, it's for everybody, whether they
Yes,
were
it's for everyone,
parliament member or not.
regardless of what, if you're Palestinian or Israeli. Okay, give it another 10 seconds. Please vote.
Can audience people vote?
Everyone
Yes.
vote, everyone.
Thank you.
Audience, Professor Bar-Tov, President of Israel, Prime Minister of Israel, Palestinian, everyone, please vote. This is
Thank
for,
you.
this is, we're asking your opinion, okay? So at this point, 54 out of 58 voted in favor. That's 93%. And 4 out of 58 voted no. That's 7%. So we started with 86% yes. We're ending up with 93%, but less people voted. All right, so just so that you know how much the common government, it would take about $100 million to create a common government. We take, the Israeli and the Palestinian governments and their war is $3 billion a week. $100 million could create a common government and could make peace. And we could create a common democracy for the people of Israel and Palestine. This is what you can also buy for $100 million. All right, let's stop the sharing and then we'll have questions to Professor Bar-Tov and to whoever wants to ask questions. Please. Please raise your hand if you want to ask questions at this time. This is an open session.
Do we want to give Professor Bar-Tov the platform to give his reactions to the simulation?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Before we start the Q&A.
Okay, Professor?
Sure. So yeah, this was very interesting. I take the point that Mona made. I think it's an important point to be made. My only comment right now, I mean, I'll make two comments, okay, two sort of responses. One is about this idea and the other is about an alternative idea. So the main problem that I remain with is that the way we understand states, we understand them as having monopoly of power. That is what enables them also to enforce laws. And that is what makes it possible to work against other malign actors in the state or against the state. In the system that we're talking about now, we have two states that would remain legitimate, as was said, and I agree, because they're recognized internationally, and which would have, the Palestinian state doesn't actually have that because there's no real Palestinian state, but the Israeli state has a monopoly of power. And we would have another body that would have no power and no monopoly of power. It would have the power of the vote. So it would claim legitimacy, but it would not be able to enforce anything without clashing with those two states unless they dissolve themselves. And so this is a particular problem for this idea. I'll just say very briefly, and Youssef and I talked about it, that there is a relevant, a related alternative to this. And those of you who are interested can also look that up, and it's called the Land for All. And the Land for All calls for a confederation between two states, a Palestinian state, which would have sovereignty and right of return, and a Jewish state, which would have sovereignty and a right of return, and right of self-determination for both of them. So it looks like the old two-state solution, but the difference would be that there would be a distinction between residence and citizenship. That is, that people would be citizens of their state, say of Palestine, but could reside in another state that is in Israel. There's somebody has to mute. Yeah. Quelqu'un en français. And that would mean that the two states would have open borders and people could move between one state and the other. And they would have confederate institutions that would take care of everything that links them together, because they are, as we know, closely linked in terms of infrastructure and mix of populations. That would resolve the problem of a third entity that is or is not recognized by the other existing entities. So these are the two comments that I wanted to make. I think this was very, very useful, and I'm happy to respond to anything that anyone wants to ask me.
Well, let me ask you this: with the Land for All, you're speaking about a confederate system.
Correct.
What would be the confederate system? Who will implement the confederate system? Who will create the confederate system?
Well, it obviously has to be the states. So the two states have to, first of all, you must have a Palestinian state, which, as I say, is largely a fiction. And when you have a Palestinian state and an Israeli state along the borders of 67, more or less, then they would agree to create a confederation. And that confederation would give people rights that they do not have now. That is, that they could be citizens of one place and live in another, that they would have some of their own institutions, state institutions, and they would have confederate institutions that would take care of infrastructure, external borders, foreign relations, security, and so forth. But obviously, the two states would have to agree to do that, and they would have to see that in their interest. That is the difficulty. The easier part of it is, as opposed to what you are proposing here, is that there would not be a third entity. And I remain skeptical that introducing a third entity, which can take you back, to the latter years of the mandate, to the original plan of the Peel Commission, which would have actually had three entities there. But that was not accepted. And I simply find it difficult to believe that the two existing entities, whatever they are, states or pre-states, would agree to have a third one without undermining it. And since that third entity would have no monopoly of power, then I don't see how it could establish itself legitimately within that existing order. So both have difficulties. I happen to think that a confederate system as a future scenario would be more workable.
All right, let's go to Una and then Amna and then Miriam.
Just a quickie, Professor. You mentioned Israel as a Jewish state. That is not democratic at all. And two states, I do not see. I do like what the Joseph's idea is: one state for all and an equal right. We cannot go back to two states, and that is not. We have to move on, not go back. What do you think, Professor?
Well, I don't know if what Joseph proposes is one state or two states. That he leaves open. Personally, I think that neither Jews nor Palestinians want to give up the right of self-determination. We may think it's a good idea. We may think it's good, but I think that most of the population there, both Palestinians and Jews, want a right of self-determination as a Jewish state and as a Palestinian state. And if they have that, then they might agree also to cooperate with each other in a confederate system. But I think that neither of them would agree to a one-state solution. And I would add that in such a state, as things exist now, Palestinians would be in a position of great weakness, simply because of the disproportionate power that the Jewish population has there, in terms of education, in terms of wealth, and so forth. So I don't think it would be fair either.
But be fair to whom?
To Palestinians. But as I say, I mean, neither Jews nor Palestinians would want it. So you cannot impose on people something that you think is good if most of them don't want it, unless you do it by force.
Okay, but which land does it belong to start with? Can we start from, little step? I'm neither Jew nor Palestinian, therefore I'm totally on the outside. And I'm asking, whose land is it?
Well, so clearly both sides say, one side says it's ours, the other side says it's ours.
Come on, you're educated. You know the history, the geography. We know, I'm speaking to some Jewish friend who said it is Palestinian land. The land was taken. Israel is built on the war crimes. Even you cannot
So, I'm happy to have that discussion. I'm not sure that all the people who are here.
I love you. Can we have it around a glass of wine? Where do you
would
live?
like to have that discussion. My own view is that both groups have a right to that land. That is my view. And the problem that they have is, how do they share it? Now, you may agree or not agree, but that's my view.
Well, I agree that both people have the right to the land, but I disagree with you, Professor. The Israeli government is unable, never been able to provide an opportunity for the Palestinians to share the land.
Of course not.
So I'm not sure why you would support the idea that the Israeli government will implement a federal government when it has proven to be useless for the people of Israel and Palestine in giving them peace.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand that rationale. All right, let's go to Amna. Amna.
Yeah, I definitely do not support Professor Omar at all in his plan. I definitely would support you a whole lot more. I believe sharing political power makes more sense than sharing land power. Because if we're sharing land power, according to his plan, they will have more power. There's no equality there. So yeah, most Palestinians would not sign up for Professor Bar-Tov. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name. Yeah, most Palestinians
Bar-Tov.
would not sign up to that plan. Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Miriam and then Charles.
Hi. I think that the biggest problem there is safety. People just want both peoples need a safe, healthy place to live and access to all the resources there. So I think that, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And maybe a one-state solution would be possible if all the needs were met. And if and both people have been abused and treated horribly throughout history and not been permitted in any other place to live. So like Israel and Palestinians need a place of their own. Both are discriminated against worldwide. And I think they have more in common than they have differences. And if they weren't so afraid of each other, I think this whole problem would be eliminated. I really believe that if there was equal power and equal safety and health benefits, that something could be worked out, but nobody's looking at that. People are just looking to blame and hate the other. And
yeah. So Professor, why do they hate each other? Why do the Israelis and the Palestinians hate each other?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Because they've been both, because they're both terrified of each other. They
I
both
know.
been
I'm
abused.
asking the professor, why is it that they are afraid or terrified of each other?
They have good reason to be afraid and terrified of each other. They've been committing a great deal of violence against each other now for over 100 years. I'm interested in, if you don't mind, there was a comment, I think, by Amna, and I'm just interested whether she thinks that most Palestinians would oppose having a Palestinian state next to the state of Israel. Is this what I understood Amna saying? Could you respond to that?
Yeah, I think most Palestinians oppose that plan. I think most Palestinians favor a one-state solution with equality for all people.
Okay, that's, do you have any sort of evidence for that, or is that
That's
just?
correct, yes.
I'm a Palestinian, and I know a lot of Palestinians, and we speak about that. And it's impossible to establish two-state solution. It's impossible right now. The land, the Israelis have settled most of the land right now. We've got 700 Israelis, you know, in illegal settlements. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? I mean, here's what I'm saying. You know, we don't want violence for anybody. Everybody just wants to be free. Everybody just wants to have opportunities to develop. We could develop together as two people, you know.
That's correct.
With freedom, with equality. We can live side by side. There's no need for hatred. The only reason Palestinians fight back is because they have no freedom. We have one side who is oppressing another side. That is the only reason there is violence. And the Palestinians have been asking, give us freedom, give us our rights, and there would be no violence. And if you want to end the violence, give the Palestinians their freedom, give them their rights. No people want to live oppressed, and the Palestinians have been oppressed and occupied and subjugated and terrorized for the last 75 years.
But he's asking you to explain why is it that, in your opinion, Palestinians do not want to have a state of their own next to Israel?
Well, most Palestinians that I speak to, we speak about this all of the time. We don't think it's going to end the violence. Two states, we can go to war the next week after it's developed. We don't think it's going to be a permanent solution to bring about peace in the land. We think if there's one state, then we're both on the same side, trying to keep the peace.
So in your opinion, Palestinians believe the two-state solution is not a solution?
Most people, yes, most Palestinians would not agree to that, especially under the circumstances as it is right now. Yes, no.
Let's go to, so let me just take this further. Professor Bar-Tov was talking about Palestinians want to have their identity. And he seemed to be connecting Palestinian state with identity. Do you believe that a common government could also give the Palestinians identity and two states?
Absolutely. I mean, here we live in America. We all have our identities, but we are still led by one government that we, you know, decide on who leads in that government. We elect our leaders. So we're not going to lose our identity. If you're Palestinian, you're going to be Palestinian. If you're Jewish, you're going to be Jewish. You're not going to lose your identity, but we're sharing political power so that everybody is free and everybody has equal power and everyone has self-determination.
I happen to agree with you.
That's correct.
Let's, Professor, do you want to respond to Amna, and then we'll go to Miriam?
No, I would totally support it. I would think it's great if it were true that most Palestinians want to have one state with the Jews in whatever we call that state and would have equal rights. I would be very much in favor of it. The history of the Palestinian national.
Professor, that's not.
Let me just finish.
Sorry.
The history of the Palestinian national movement has not been that. If you look at what Palestinians have wanted politically over the years, they've wanted a Palestinian state. When the PLO spoke at the time about a democratic secular state, they also limited the number of Jews that they allowed to be there. In the original declaration, these had to be Jews that came before the Balfour Declaration. So if there is today, if there were a Palestinian organization that spoke about creating a unified state, Jewish and Palestinian, that everybody would have the same rights, I would be the first one to support it. My understanding from many conversations that I've had with Palestinians is that what they would like is what the Jews have, a right of self-determination, a right of return, and their own institutions. Now, if I'm wrong, great. I mean, I'll be very happy to support that.
But Professor, with all due respect, I think that you're speaking about two different things. You're speaking about your idea, which is to have the Israeli government and the Palestinian government create a federal government. That means you support the Israeli government. On the other hand, you say that you also support a one state. So if you support one state, I don't think that it's fair to say what the Palestinians want. I think it's fair to say what you want. And you have to say clearly, what is it that you support? Do you support two states or do you support one state? Do you support the land for all formula, which is for the Israeli government and the Palestinian government to create a federal government, or do you support one state?
I support what I believe is both realistic and just. I don't support things that are pie in the sky. Now, I think that having a confederation between two sovereign states, a Palestinian state and a state of Israel, is realistic in the long run. I don't think it can happen today, but I think it's a realistic plan. I think that having a one state in which Jews and Palestinians will live with equal rights and dignity is a much better idea. But I don't think that Israel is the United States. I don't think this will ever happen. But if I were persuaded that enough Palestinians and Jews wanted that, and I'm not persuaded, not the Jews and not the Palestinians want that, certainly not most of the Jews. Since I'm not persuaded that that is possible, I can support it as a utopia, but I don't think it's going to happen. And that's why I support the land for all, because I think that will reflect better what is both wanted by people and what is practical.
So you say that the Israeli government, which has failed to give peace to the Jewish people and the Palestinian people for 75
Change
years.
the government. Change the government. The government is not God-given.
They have many governments for 75 years.
Yes, but things have gotten worse and worse over time.
You're saying you're basically saying that a Zionist government is the whatever constellation, but if it's a Zionist government, then that government will be able to create a federal system that
No
would
way.
be fair to the Palestinians and the Israelis together. Is that what you're saying?
No, it's not a federal system. It's a confederate system. It's two independent entities. Look, Israel has never given anything without pressure. Never. It gave back the Sinai Peninsula because it had to, because it fought a bad war in which both you and I were. So Israel is not a country that likes giving anything back.
Correct.
It does so under pressure, but that pressure can be created. That pressure can actually bring about change. Everything that we have seen up to now has shown, I think, many people that the Palestinian issue, which many people thought had disappeared, that nobody cared about them, is back. And because it's back, and because Israel is now with its face to the wall, I think that this is a time to put pressure on Israel, on politicians in Israel, to change that policy and to try and find a way to resolve this conflict. I do not think that if you were to come now to any Israeli politician or to 90% of the Jewish population of Israel and say, okay, we are now going to have a state where all the Palestinians will have the same rights as you, that it will not happen. It's a nice idea, but it's not going to happen. You have to offer people something that is realistic. If you want to propose something that you think is the best, even though it's not realistic, because it makes you feel good, then that's fine, but it's politically not viable. So I'm talking about something that I think is viable, not because people like Netanyahu and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir will support it, but because there will be mass international pressure on Israel to reach an agreement between two states, not an agreement to create something that nobody wants. That's how I see it.
Let's go to Charles and then Ihab and then Ingeborg.
Professor, the impasse that, as I see it currently, is on both sides in that they is a very strong, I don't know whether it's a majority, but certainly a very large minority of the population on both sides that are unwilling to compromise on the idea that they want control of the entire territory. Now, on the Palestinian side, I would say that they would, I mean, Arafat back in '74, as you said, was pushing for a secular democratic state. And the reason why he wanted to limit, the Jewish right of return is for the same reason that the Israeli state wants to basically, maintain their demographics by ethnic cleansing if necessary to make sure that Jews control the entire territory and they can still call it a democracy. So given that that is the case, and given that Israel has basically a monopoly on power, I mean, Hamas has made its attacks and whatnot, but we can see the disproportionate results. And they have established throughout the West Bank for the last 75 years with the exact purpose of destroying the possibility of a Palestinian state coming into existence by creating settlements, bypass highways and military checkpoints and military outposts. Support them.
What is your question, Charles?
I don't see the land for all formula as any more politically feasible as a solution to end violence than what we are proposing here. I think that the ability to grant each side their to have completely retain their identity as an Israeli or a Palestinian, but give them a forum in which they can work together with equal rights without resolving the territory dispute
Mhm.
is really the only way forward, because basically Israel controls primarily all of the territory except for that small strip in Gaza, in which Hamas has never, the reason why they do have some support is because they have never agreed to a partition. And they represent those Palestinians who will not ever agree to a partition of the territory. And that position is maintained on both sides, obviously, by Israeli settlers as well. So I don't see you threading that needle with the land for all solution, is all I'm trying to say. Your comment?
Well, look, I mean, that may be the case. The idea, and you can look it up if you want, Lanfranc. The idea there, as I said, is that you have two states, two sovereign states along the lines of 67. So now you're talking about, say, about 500,000 Jewish settlers who are on the wrong side of the border. They would now be in the Palestinian state. Now, many of them, I suspect, would not want to stay there. But if they did want to stay there, they could stay there, but they would be then residents of Palestine and citizens of Israel. And if they broke the law in Palestine, they would go to jail, because if they went and uprooted olive trees or burned down houses, then they would end up in jail. If they vote, if they're good citizens and they don't do that, and they go to elections, they could vote for an Israeli parliament. And Palestinians who live now in Toronto and want to go back with the law of return to Palestine could go back to Palestine. And if they wanted to go to their ancestral home in Haifa, they could go and live in Haifa as residents, but they would be citizens of a Palestinian state. Now, right now, in the territory that we are talking about, there's 7 million Palestinians and 7 million Jews, but they're all mixed together. And indeed, the two possible solutions to that are having one state in which everybody would have the same rights, or two states in which people could move, as they do, say, in the EU. You could be a French citizen and be living in Berlin, but you would vote for France and you would obey the laws of Germany. That, I think, would give people the sense that they have a state that is their state, that they would have the laws that they want, they would have the religion, whatever they want to have there, the political expression of their self-determination. I'm not talking about identity. Identity is a mushy thing. I'm talking about self-determination. That's a political thing. They would have a state that is the manifestation of their political identity, of their self-determination, and they would be able to live in any part of that land that both groups call their own, even though you could not be a citizen of all of it. That is another option. So these are the two options that we are facing, one state or this kind of confederation, since the two-state solution, the original two-state solution, is indeed dead, and it's dead because of the settlement. Of course it is. We know all of that. Now, which one do I think is more viable? That is, which could win more support among people there and more international support? I think the confederation system would bring more support, because these are states. Israel is a state that is internationally recognized, and Palestine is more or less recognized, though it has very little power. States understand that. States understand a right of self-determination. They know how to deal with that. There was a UN resolution that created two states once. It's still on the books. I think it would be something that would appeal more to the people on the ground and more to the international community. I may be wrong. We both want the same thing. I may be wrong, but I think that the idea right now for Palestinians and Jews, that they would live in the same state, have the same laws, would not be appealing. Now, Amna thinks differently. That's not the impression that I get from many conversations I have with Palestinians, and I'm positive that most Israelis most Jewish Israelis, would not accept this. And you could not force them that down their throat. So you have to find a way of somehow squaring the circle. How do you get there? As Joseph was asking, you have to do it through massive international pressure, which I think one can build up, and each of us can put that pressure on their own governments, on their own representatives, for a major change, a major shift in Israeli policy. I think there's a chance of that, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. Israel right now is facing allegations of genocide in the ICJ. It will hopefully be on the defensive for a long time to come. Its economy will be in ruins, and this is a point, this is a moment at which this political paradigm can be changed, but it has to be changed realistically, not simply thinking about what I most like. It's what the people on the ground want and what they can get. That's my view.
All right, let's go to Ihab. We need to move a little faster because.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, but I have to go in 5 minutes. I just
Okay,
have
let's go to
another thing coming up.
Ihab and then Ingeborg, to make it quick. Questions and answers. Ihab. Ihab, please ask your question. You need to unmute.
You're muted.
Yes, thank you. I'll take talk in Hebrew and Joseph
אני
will
מדבר עברית,
translate.
זה בסדר. אז תשאל בעברית.
אני חושב, עומר, שהאוכלוסייה היהודית-ציונית בעיקר עברה הקצנה ימינה חבל על הזמן בשנים האחרונות. עכשיו, גם הפתרון של שתי מדינות לשני עמים, זה כבר עבר מהעולם בעיניהם. הם היום מדברים על מדינה ישראלית אחת, שאם אפשר ככה, שאנחנו נתעדה הפלסטינים, אזרחי ישראל והגדה ועזה, והם עובדה התחילו לממש תוכנית ההכרעה של סמוטריץ' שאתה בטח מכיר. ולצערי הרב היא מתחילה להתממש כרגע בעזה, הם מייחלים לזה. אז אני חושב כל רעיון אם אנחנו מעבירים הנדסת תודעה חדשה, כי אני אזרח ישראלי, אני אומנם פלסטיני אבל אני חי בישראל, אני אזרח ישראלי מלידה, ואנחנו מרגישים את הנדסת התודעה מהיום הראשון שבו אנחנו נולדים, גם ערבים וגם יהודים. הפתרון הכי צודק בעיניי זה פתרון המדינה האחת. שייתן זכויות לשני העמים, לגור איפה שאתה רוצה, לחיות איך שאתה רוצה. זה אומנם, כפי שאמרת, זה קצת לא מתקבל על הדעת בחברה הישראלית, אבל גם כאילו כל פתרון אחר, הקונפדרציה, הפדרציה, ארץ לכולם, ושתי מדינות לשני העמים, אפילו מה שהיה אקטואלי ב-95, בתקופת הסכם השלום, היום גם לא אקטואלי, לפחות אצל 50% לפחות מהחברה היהודית ציונית לצערי הרב. אז אנחנו בבעיה. לא יודע, אני חושב שיש פתרונות. כן, הנדסת תודעה שאנחנו ממש עוברים בארץ, הנדסת תודעה שהקצינה אותנו ימינה, כי הקצינה את היהודים ציונים בעיקר, אני כערבי פלסטיני, ישראלי זה קצת שונה. זה מה שרציתי להגיד בגדול, שצריך להנדס לנו את התודעה מחדש, לחנך אותנו מחדש בארץ, ואנחנו חייבים את הכפייה הבינלאומית. אנחנו חייבים את הכפייה הבינלאומית. אם אנחנו רוצים באמת הסדר מדיני ארוך טווח שיפתור את הסכסוך, אנחנו חייבים פתרון צודק, לא רק פתרון שיתקבל על האוכלוסייה הישראלית ציונית.
מה אתה חושב יותר ריאליסטי משתי האלטרנטיבות האלה לדעתך?
איזה אלטרנטיבה? שתי מדינות או קונפדרציה אתה מתכוון?
לא, קונפדרציה או מדינה אחת.
מה יותר ריאליסטי?
Can you maybe answer in English so everybody understands?
He's asking what do you think is more legitimate, confederation or one state?
Not legitimate. What is more realistic, I'm asking, yeah.
More realistic now?
More realistic. between the two in terms of persuading people.
הקונפדרציה יותר ריאלית כאילו, אבל גם היא לא תתקבל. תשמע, אני ביוזמה הזאת של הקונפדרציה כבר 3 שנים.
Is more realistic, but it's not going to be accepted.
כן, באוכלוסייה הישראלית ציונית, יוסף.
Israeli Zionist society.
היום שום פתרון שמדבר על זכות ההגדרה העצמית הפלסטינית ממש חסום בחברה היהודית ציונית, ברובה אני מדבר.
Any solution that speaks about the Palestinian identity is blocked by the Israeli society. All right, let's go to Ingeborg, ask your question, and then we'll conclude. Ingeborg.
Yes. As I understand the IPC, I see it as a tool for change. And but it starts like in a one state because it reckons with, there are several points like to give the party in control, give the veto power, or it goes like in very, very tiny steps towards a good solution for both peoples. And I see it as a tool. I see also like the very first legislation we voted about was the education, which is an extremely important step to make this tool bigger with the kids growing up into adults and being better able to understand each other and being better able to work in this IPC. While the two-state solution, which Professor Bar-Tov suggests, is something you want to start with this two-state solution with whatever way it will look like the two-state solution is like for me a bit a utopia that has to be implemented somehow by whom. I don't know if we have enough international pressure to go there. And it's like it starts with a very big step to these two states. And the IPC, it's a tool to move to even possibly to a two-state solution if finally the IPC decides it, but both is possible. But it starts with very small steps, and it requires people to learn, and people will learn. So I'm sorry, I didn't know it was about questions, but what I want to say is I think it's a great tool that maybe in the beginning doesn't work yet or works very slowly or is full of vetoes, but it will change. And especially with this first legislation about the education, I think it's very, very important. Very important to make this tool work with in 10 years, even better than now. So that's what I wanted to say. And thank you for this hour. It was great.
Thank you. Professor, do you have to go or do you?
Yeah, I'll just say one last thing in response to this, and I really have to go, and that is that
make your concluding remark, and then we'll go on after you leave.
So I totally agree with what we just heard. I think this is a tool, and I think that if it succeeds, then whatever it leads to would be much better than what we have now. I don't know whether it will, but if it does, I mean, if you're able to raise the money, if you're able to have a vote, if you get 7 million people voting, that will make a really important statement toward any other solution, one state, two states, whatever. And that would be, I would certainly support that. I think its goal is a really good goal. Everything that I said was that I'm a bit skeptical whether it will succeed, but if it does, I'm totally in favor of it. I'm sorry, but I'm already late to another meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have another meeting with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, appreciate that. All right, let's go to Jesse.
Thank you, Professor.
Hi.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Professor. I'd just like to echo the last comment and just kind of point out that this confederation idea, the IPC confederation, this is not a Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger confederation. This is not what this is. I think some people are a little confused with some of the wording, but this is simply giving legitimacy to millions of people that live in the area to make a future for themselves, because the current status quo has failed. And I really believe in this. And I said in the chat that if this goes through and we have 20 legislations in the first year and 19 of them get vetoed, that's one solution that we would have never had for that one legislation. So I really hope that people will move past the word confederation. This is not the Arab League Republic confederation that they had with Syria and Egypt and all that. This is something totally different, and I hope people can open their eyes. This is not saying that we can't have, one state, one secular state, two separate states. It's not saying any of those things. It's just saying this is a path towards diplomacy and peace. And my last comment I want to just say is just forget the UN. Just, they could pass all the resolutions in the world, but the current state of the UN with the 5 permanent members and the Security Council, it's undemocratic anyways. But thank you so much, Joseph, for having this.
All right, thank you.
And thank you, Dan, for help with my tech stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go to Samir.
Yes, hi everybody. Yes, I just want to explain again that why I am for one secular democratic state, because it's simply right now, in reality, there is one state or one apartheid state. So in a way, it is like half of the way. If we go for one secular democratic state, no more discussion about the lands. I mean, it is only the rights. So
exactly,
as Professor Bar-Tov said, that the whole issue is about lands and rights. So when you go for one state, that's it. You don't need to discuss the land for all. That's it. It is only the rights and equal rights. And that will be the fight, will be easier. It's like half the way we passed it, and now the other half will be just make it into a democratic state, equal rights, everybody, all Palestinian, they live in one land and they have equal rights. So that's why I believe it is the best solution already. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Samir. Charles, did you want to say anything? Your hand is still up.
Yeah, I just wanted to get back with Omer Bar-Tov to say that I don't see that the land for all formula with having residents in two states side by side does anything to correct the situation, because there's still going to be a dramatic difference in power, and I just don't see the state of Israel pulling its not just its residents, but all of its military outposts that it claims it needs for security out of the West Bank. They're never going to agree to that. So then how do you accommodate the aspirations of people on both sides that want to be able to have access to 100% of the territory? Well, obviously you have to create a system where their trust increases over time so that they are able to work with each other inside one territory, which I think, the IPC offers, but it is a heavy lift. So
let me
You froze, Joseph.
Describe to you what land for all is and why I think it's a failure. I'm muted? Okay. Land for all basically says we are selective Israeli and Palestinian people. We decide substantive issues about border, about the right of return, about citizenship. We, not the parliament. We, meaning those people decide those issues on our own, and then we will cause the Israeli and the Palestinian government to accept, to agree with our solution and to vote the way we decide that it will be voted upon. And he's speaking about it as being a realistic plan. It's not a realistic plan at all. It's basically them deciding to separate the area based on 1967 border, to decide on exchange of citizenship or giving a right of citizenship to certain people or not. And the Israeli government, which is the most difficult government, to say the least, or in my opinion, dangerous government, to agree with what they are imposing on the government. That's why I don't think they are, and they don't have a system. They don't have a federal government. They don't know how would the federal government, they're speaking about a confederation, but they don't have a confederation. They don't have a system of a confederation. They're saying the Israeli government will decide on a confederation the way we want it. And the Palestinian government will decide on a confederation the way we want it. And they are describing that as a realistic solution. Now, like I said, we are not against any other solution. We are in favor of competition. We are in favor of competition between Land for All and our formula. We are in favor of competition between all other solutions. But I think that they will not be able to even get to the starting point, because at the end of the day, they will be asked, what will be the federal system that you're proposing? And they will say what he said, which is the Israeli and the Palestinian governments will agree to it. Now, at the end of at some point, you have to recognize that the Israeli and the Palestinian government, you have to admit, you have to come to terms with, they are failed governments. They were not able to agree on anything. But to say, well, we will agree for them and they will accept what we agree, is totally unrealistic. Totally unrealistic. Now, I don't understand what was unrealistic about our plan. What is unrealistic about it? He admitted at the end, if you're able to raise the money, $100 million, if you're able to get people to vote, then there is a possibility. And I think that $100 million is a realistic goal. To get people to vote is a realistic goal out of the 14 million people. And to create a legitimate government for the whole people of Israel and Palestine is not only realistic, it's the only democratic, humane formula for peace. Okay, I don't see anybody. Oh, okay. Ingeborg, you want to make a statement or?
No, I just wanted to make the thumbs up to what you said, because I totally agree. But I mean, before I said it's a tool, and it's a tool that can start to work with the status quo.
Exactly.
It can start to work immediately if people vote. And if we start with Professor Bar-Tov's vision of two states, it would be great, but it would be great. It's so far from the status quo that I don't see a way how we can get there to even start working with this vision. But what we heard now and what you made us also practice and see it working is a tool that can start to work with the status quo. And that's why I really like it, because it can work with, oh, my accu is very low. It's in 30 seconds, I'm gone. So I say thank you for this evening.
Oh,
it was
thank you
great,
so much.
and I wish you so much good luck. I will, if I can help, I will help. My akku is dying. I'm glad I could stay until now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Goodbye.
All right, goodbye. Amna, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I support your plan. I mean, we've been talking about a two-state solution for 75 years. And if we continue talking about a two-state solution, we're going to be continuing to talk about this years.
Another 75 years.
Nothing. Yes. A
Yes.
two-state solution presents many, many problems, many, many obstacles. But if we shift the dialogue in the plan on
Exactly.
political power instead of land power, then we can move forward because people just want to be free. People want rights. When people are free, they're not going to, there's nothing to fight for. I mean, in terms of violence, we're not fighting for land now. You can live wherever you want to live and you have the same power as anybody else in this country. So yeah, we cannot continue to talk about two-state solution. There's only one state. Federal system balances the needs of both people, and it voice to both people. And I definitely support that. When you first presented this, I wasn't sure, but I am convinced this is a good plan. So I will help
Thank
you
you.
any way I can.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I had a great
Thank
time.
you.
Come into the next simulation. I appreciate that. And we'll have another conversation. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank